All right, we are connected. So good morning. I just wanted to introduce everyone to you. You are Dr. Germayne Graham. Um, we are going to discuss some of the topics about racism and the protests that are happening right now. Um, Dr. Graham, if you don't mind, just maybe telling everyone a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Germayne Graham, and I am currently the Associate Director of the Lead Scholars Academy at UCF. And I also work in the President's Office as the Director of the President's Leadership Council. These are both positions that focus on student leadership development and really enhancing a lot of those essential skills that students need for work and just to survive. I've been at UCF for about 19 years, and I'm originally from a very, very small town in Alabama. So I grew up in the South, and I have two kids, and my husband, we all live here in Orlando, and I'm a former mental health professional. I worked for about 8 years in a college counseling center here at UCF and trained in mental health, and felt my calling was a bit broader in terms of really working with student development and student affairs. And so I still use some of those very valuable skills, just on a broader basis. So.
Wow, that's very, very dynamic. You have so many hats and a lot of experience. So I'm sure you're going to have a lot to offer for this whole conversation. Um, if anybody doesn't know who I am, my name is Jeffrey McCary. So I work for the Mental Health Association, and I'm going to be asking Dr. Graham some questions about the topics that have been coming up in a lot of people's minds and heads of how to deal with these protests and all the anger and sadness that is going on. So to begin, Dr. Graham, I wanted to ask you, what role does protest play in democracy? And are nonviolent protests always the best way? Are riots ever justified?
That's an interesting question. I think, I definitely think every person and everybody that's participating in this great response right now has a role. And I personally believe that protesting is the voice that gets all of these things out there in front of people. So you see a protester on TV, you see a protester in front of your car, you can't say, there's nothing happening. So I think the protesters are voices, and we have to hear those voices. I think protesting becomes extreme and can turn into riots. And that's always been the case. That's not anything new. I mean, if you look at the history of the civil rights movement, you look at any protesting that's happening, you see that there's always, that anger always goes a little bit too far. So there's always going to be folks who are just really expressive. It's a part of it. And I think what we can't do is ignore the voices and ignore the emotions that they are trying to express. If your voice is not heard, then you're going to do the next thing that's going to get you heard. And sometimes that's not a very positive thing. If it's inside, it's coming out. And there's a lot of pent up feelings, anger, feeling like you're not heard. And that's what we're seeing right now. And so I don't judge what's happening, because I think that people are expressing the best way that they can. They're putting words out there in the form of action and in the form of signs, all of the things that we're seeing. those are their words and their expressions to what's happening.
That's very true. And when you were saying that these are situations that are coming up for people who aren't being heard, it reminded me of the Martin Luther King speech where he said, "Riots is the voice of the unheard."
Mm-hmm.
So it's it's incredible to just know, even back then, the things that he was saying, how it contains to right now what we're going through. So I hope at this point we can learn something from at least what Martin Luther King said at that time. So thank you for that.
And Dr. King, he's our role model for nonviolent protesting. But even he recognized that at some level you can't control the rage of people when they just really feel like they're not being heard. And I think he did that in a way, and just by saying, people, this is their voice. This is what they're saying. You can't ignore that. You can't ignore that anger is an emotion, but it has a root. And what is that root?
Exactly. Yeah, and a lot of people I've heard through social media try to use Martin Luther King as a way of saying that he was not against violent protests and riots and things like that, which I believe innately he is. But it was important for him to say these things for the people who are upset and angry and going through these raw emotions, to have other people be able to understand why this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of wisdom there.
Mm-hmm. It's very similar, I think, to one of the things that I see a lot in Black culture is when we're grieving, and when you go to Black funerals and people tell you, be strong, and don't cry, or be strong for this person, or hold it together. And what you're saying is, don't express what you're really feeling. And so when we tell people not to be angry or not to express their feelings, then we're pushing that emotion back down. And they don't want to be told, don't express your anger in this way, or don't express your emotions in this way. They don't want to be told that because they're having some real emotions. Now, can we train people to express their emotions in a safe way and in a safe place? Yes, but to just simply say, hold it down, and, be strong, keep it together. Well, that's the problem. We've been keeping it together for a long time, and now a lot of that is coming out.
Yes, big time. Okay. So I think everyone knows that there's something different about this time.
Mm-hmm.
The anger feels different, the sadness feels different. What do you think contributes to this feeling of this protest, and why does it feel different?
I personally think that we're in we're in the midst of a pandemic, and so people have been quarantined for a while, and so there's a lot of time to think, to reflect, but also a lot of time where there is no contact, no you've been sort of locked in physically. So I think that people are responding to a lot of the issues around inequities during this pandemic. They're responding to just seeing injustice after injustice after injustice. And we've just had a lot of time, I think, this time around to sit with it. Another thing I think that is different is, for me, I think that more people, more allies and more folks who are non-Black are angry this time because they see it, and they saw a man lose his life on live video, or on a TV show, on a TV news show. They saw this happen. And so for us, it's happen. It's just there's a lot of incidents that are similar to that that are not recorded. And to actually have to sit there and to see it, there's no filter, no explanation that can explain this away. I think that people had to face that this is really a reality. I've had more non-Black friends contact me and say, you know, when you were talking about microaggressions and I didn't get it, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or you were talking about how, you know, this happened in South Carolina and it impacted you and you weren't related to any of those people in the church. I get it now. And I think a lot of people who are who've sat on the sidelines and wanted to be supportive but couldn't really get it are now getting it, and they're speaking out and they're angry, and you're like, oh, okay, so this is real. And I think it validates for a lot of Black folks that you're not paranoid, and that this really did happen, that that person really did slight you, or you really didn't get that opportunity because of race. So I think that it's validating for us that a lot of those things that have been pushed aside in the past they really were significant, and they really did impact you. You know, those microaggressions are real.
Yes, they are. And just on the topic of microaggressions, it just, I know I watched a video recently, and it's like mosquitoes, and they just kind of just annoy you and nag you, you know, we brush them off, you know, and then before you know it, we're exploding and people are trying to understand what is it coming from. So I believe a lot of people from the communities of white culture are starting to realize a little bit of it and getting a little bit of that nagging feeling, and you know, and trying to brush it off in a sense, but now it's come up to the point where it's like, okay, we can't take it anymore either. Mm-hmm. So it is definitely validating to see that, for sure. It shocked me in a way just to see the mass form of just support that that people are getting. So it's really nice to see. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. And it's different in a way too that made me hopeful. And I think in the past, if you've, you know, for me, I've expressed, you know, this really bothered me, or it hurt me, or it really caused me to feel uncomfortable. People were okay hearing that and would, you know, do the right thing and say, yeah, you know, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way. But now they're saying, I get it. I get how it feels. And I think that is a very giant step. And that makes me hopeful that now that there is the shift here, there can be some more shifts physically. There can be some more shifts to really tackle some of the systemic stuff that we see. And I'm like, I think we're at that place where we might be ready to take a bigger jump.
Yes, and I think you hit it. Like, I think that is why it feels different, because there is a shift in mindset. Because I mean, I believe we always felt as Black people, we've always had this type of mindset, but it feels different because we've noticed that other people are having this mindset too, and getting that understanding of the things that we've gone through. Right. So it's very comforting and feels good in a way. Okay, so let me just go to the next one. So as a psychologist, you understand trauma very well. Would you characterize the reactions from the protests and the riots as maybe a mass form of trauma to people of color?
I definitely, yeah. I mean, I think it's trauma because people that are out there saw something and reacted to something. Seeing a man die in 8 minutes is a trauma, and they're reacting to that. And not only are they just reacting to physically seeing that or hearing it or reading about it, they're reacting to years of trauma that they've experienced, you know, attaching it to a memory of something that happened to them that's not similar, but it brought up those same emotions of feeling unheard or feeling marginalized or feeling like you're not good enough, feeling like you're trash. Because essentially when I saw that, I felt like they treated Mr. Floyd like trash. Like the way that they treated his body, I was most impacted by how they treated his body after they killed him. They picked up his body like it was just garbage. Like the paramedics had no care in picking it up. I think out of all of what I saw, that impacted me the most. And that message to me just felt like we're garbage or we're trash. And so then it takes you back to experiences where you felt like, you know, for me, where I felt like I was trash or garbage in someone's eyes. And I think a lot of people are experiencing those moments where they feel like, you know, that didn't happen to me, but something very similar happened to me, and those feelings and those emotions are being invoked.
Sounds like a lot of PTSD and just a whole bunch of psychological symptoms to what's going on. Yeah, and I understand, like a lot of people are sad, and that typically means that there's a lot of anger behind it. And the ones that are expressing it with a lot of anger typically mean that they're very sad.
Yes.
So it's kind of interesting to see the reactions to it, but all in all, it's just a lot of trauma behind it.
And they're going to need help processing this because, you know, we go out and we, you know, the folks that are protesting, you know, say, well, we're protesting because we want to see justice. And so we understand that some things have happened. You know, there have been some arrests and there have been some upgrading in terms of the charges. And so now what next? And so I think now we're still angry, but what do we do with that? You know, there's still that aftermath of the trauma. So what's next? Where do we go? And, you know, I know it's not over. I'm still looking around. So that there's a lot of things that we're going to have to tackle, you know, in the next couple of weeks. It's not going to ever go back to normal or the way it was before. Because I think, as we just stated, as both of us just said earlier, this time is different.
Yeah, it surely is. And including the pandemic, it just calls for a moment of just almost like a revamping of how we go about our daily lives, whether that's with each other or yourself. So I think now for sure is a pivotal moment for a lot of change. Awesome. So kind of going off of the last thing you said, so knowing your role in UCF as the Associate Director of Lead Scholar Academy, what should leadership look like in a crisis like this?
And this has been really, it's been tough for me because I had to first get myself together. I have two daughters. I have a 9-year-old and a 13-year-old. And so having to explain a lot of what's happening to them sort of took me out of all of my roles, my professional roles, for a second, because I was like, wait a minute, my kids are asking me questions that I hadn't thought about that I have to answer at this age. And so once I figured that out in my life, I went back to what's core for me and what my role has always been, and what I feel like my strength is, and that is listening and encouraging and giving people a safe place to be. And so, you know, one of the first things I did was contact all of the students. I'm teaching a couple classes this summer, was contact all of my students and say, hey, I know this is not business as usual, you know, in the context of our course, we have to stop and address this. So, you know, if you need me, I'm here to listen and, you know, to be a part of this experience for you. And you know, the second thing I did was contact, you know, some of the folks that I supervise and some of the students that I work directly with, and I offered the same thing. And through that process, I started to understand that as a leader, that is the role. The role is one to check yourself out first and find, okay, I can't, you can't just go on fumes. You can't just jump out there without taking care of yourself. Really assess yourself and what you're able to do. Think about the things that you're able to do, not overextending yourself, but the situations where you're most helpful. Where are your strengths? Where are your skills? And then second, checking on the folks that you work with and that you know are impacted, and everybody is. And then the third thing is really putting into action the things that you can. I know that I'm a listener. I know that I'm an encourager. I know that I can share my voice and my knowledge and the things that I've experienced, the things that I've learned in my past positions and roles. So I know that's something that I can offer. And so I think that's what I'm teaching my leaders. That's what I'm teaching the folks that I work with is first, assess you. Two, make sure that you check on the folks that are around you that you have to work with. And then three, finding your lane, finding what you're good at. Some folks, we need protesters. We need people to keep the noise. We need folks who are out in the street saying, this is not over. We also need people who are going to get the water for the protesters, who are going to have the bail for the protesters. We need the folks who are cooking dinner for the protesters. You know, if you think about the civil rights marches, when Dr. King had a well-organized, they had strategy. They had people who were sitting at the church waiting for people to come back. They had people who trained just to go out to protest because they knew that the dogs were coming. They knew that the water hoses were coming. They trained to do that. They had folks who had the bail money ready to go get them out. Everybody plays a role. And I think once people understand what their role is, it sort of takes away some of the anxiety and the guilt and all of the things that I'm not doing enough, or I'm not, you know, or I'm doing too much. Finding your lane. And that's what I really teach my leaders. We use the social change model of leadership, which implies that we make change where we are. You're a leader where you are. And real leaders make changes by encouraging those around them, sharing a vision and implementing that. And, you know, I've had students who, you know, decided that they were going to make masks in the middle of the pandemic and go distribute them. That's leadership. You know, that's, you're taking control over the area that you're responsible for and you're making a real change. And that's leadership, and that's adapting to where you are.
Yes. Wow. That was just very well said. And I hope a lot of people who are listening to this who are struggling with not knowing what to do can hear you say, you know, just do what you can. You can be a leader in your own way. Protesting is not for everyone, especially with the pandemic going around. A lot of people are fearful of going out, so you don't have to have any shame or guilt for that. You know, there's different ways of protesting or helping out, advocating. I appreciate you saying that. So I guess kind of going on that, and so I guess it maybe a little expanding more of it, the exposure to the news and the violence and anger is very overwhelming for a lot of people, and for me as well. So the feeling of being stuck is a consensus that I'm getting from a lot of people. What can you say to the people who want to get involved, but somehow don't know where to go and how to start?
Mm-hmm. Um, I, I think that sitting and consuming a lot of information sometimes can paralyze you, because you can feel like, "Oh, I'm getting a lot of ideas and I don't know which way to go," or you can feel um, just overwhelmed with emotion. I mean, whether it's grief or sadness or anger, and that you feel stuck. I would say it, it's I'm not going to tell people not to read, because you want to know what's happening and you want to watch the news, but everything in moderation, I think, is fine. You have to you know, pinpoint the times that are good for you to consume, and then take yourself away from that and do something that is going to be helpful to you, like writing. Yesterday, I took a minute away from, you know, work and things that, you know, that I'm involved in, and my daughters and I, we just painted. You know, we just did some painting, and then I came back after that and did some more work, but I felt rejuvenated because I was like, okay, I can do this. You know, you have to find a place to get your focus. And, you know, and you learn that in mental health. Mental health professionals will tell you that you always need a place to distress. I mean, you find yourself not breathing. You know, if when you're watching, I was watching a news show and I was so angry that I realized I wasn't even breathing. I was just, you know, I just kind of stopped. So you have to pay attention to even those physical things that are happening to your body. I mean, you're building up a lot of tension. You're building up a lot of chemicals in your body that cause us to stay stuck. And so, you know, paying attention to our eating, paying attention to our sleeping habits, you know, is the first thing that we do pick up, you know, in the morning, is to pick up our phone and read the news. For some of us, that, you know, it could be, you know, our timelines and things like that. But finding space to pray, to meditate, to read, and taking yourself away from it, so that when you do go back, you're stronger. I took some time away, and then I was like, okay, now I can think. These are the strategies that I need to use, and these are the things that I'm good at. And we forget to do the basic, simple things when we're just consumed by everything that's in front of us. You know, whether it's reading or watching the news, you have to do those things, but everything in moderation, I think, is healthy for us.
Yes. Thank you for that. Yeah, what you were touching on is mindfulness. For a lot of people who don't understand this, it's very important, just to pause and think about, you know, the things that you're feeling and your breathing and what you're tasting. So it's a way to feel grounded and decompress and kind of just be in the present. So
Yes.
that's very important. Um, so to go on from that, how may someone speak up for those important issues while taking care of their mental health?
Mhm.
So I know we kind of just talked a little bit about mindfulness and some of the other coping strategies. Um,
Mhm.
is there any way that you would specifically maybe target just taking care of your mental health without, I guess, getting too wrapped around, I guess, protesting and advocating?
Mhm. So people, I mean, I think there's obviously some things that you can do to make your voice heard. I mean, protesting physically, whether that's going out in your city and in your town, in your state, and making signs and things like that. People have been protesting online and making posts on their social media, and you know, all of everything that we do, I think, is going to take, you're taking risk when you put your voice out there. So as you begin to think about ways that you want to put your voice out there, you also want to prepare for the responses that you might get. And I think that's what's tiring folks out, is that sometimes it's easy to make a statement, but then the hardest thing is getting the responses back and from people that you wouldn't expect to get those responses back. So preparing for that, once you do make statements, you know, use the delete button, use the unfollow button, use all of those things to guard your ears and your heart from messages that are just not helpful. But use also that avenue to have constructive conversations with people that people who are meaningful, people who mean something to you in your life. I've had some difficult conversations, but they've been so productive. And going into the conversation, my intent was never to change the person, but to hear them and for them to hear me. And that goes to another thing, listening. I mean, something that we can all do in this season is listen to the voices, listen to what people have to say. In all of the things that you do, I think, again, knowing that they're all important, you're taking a risk that people might, respond to you in a way that you're not prepared for, but you're also taking a risk that might turn out great, that might turn out to be that one person, your neighbor that you've never spoken to, might agree with you. I think it's just important to know that you have a voice. And like I said, it's different. Knowing that you have a voice this time is different because now there are more allies. There are more people who agree with you than not. There's very few people that can look at that video and not see the life of a man who had, kids and a family and who had a life. If we can agree on anything, we can agree on that. Was that wrong to take his life? Okay, well, we agree on that. And if that's the best that we can agree on, that's great. So not being, you can't tackle everything, but your voice is what's most important during this time. Just expressing your voice, whether it's print, written, whether it's, whether you put it on social media, whether you put it on a sign, whether you walk, just expressing your voice, I think is something we all can do.
Yes. And I like that you said that, because a lot of people I've noticed, even on social media, have not really said things about it in the past, from all cultures, even the Black community. And now I'm seeing a lot of people come out and say things of the injustice that they've seen in this video, and a lot of things that's gone on ever since. So a lot of people are finding their voice, and it's being validated, and that's good to hear. And just going back to why it feels different, I think a lot of it is because people are finding their voice and they're not afraid to say what they need to say anymore. But to also go on what you said, even though you are going to find your voice or say something, there could be an instance where somebody comes back at you, and you just have to be prepared for that.
Yes.
Yes, so that's great that you said that. And just going along with that, I was thinking about people who don't really feel the same way about this experience, and are trying to understand. What can you say, or what can one gain to better understand racism and take actions in justice in their daily life? They don't really get it all the way.
Mm-hmm. So for those who are still not getting it, well, first, to the person who is having to talk to the person that doesn't get it, be patient with them and with yourself, because there will be people who, it's deeply rooted, and it's deeply rooted in fear. It's deeply rooted in, their culture, their background, and how they've been raised. And so being patient with other people as they go through this process, knowing that, one conversation might not change them, takes a lot of burden, a lot of weight off of you. So I wanted to say that first. But for the people who are still having a hard time understanding why this act is racist and why racism is bad and wrong. I mean, of course, there's lots of resources out there that they can start to read and to discover on their own. But I would say at the basic level and at the core of every human being, ask yourself, what do all people deserve? What does every human deserve? And every human deserves the right to be understood, to be heard, and to be loved and to be respected. No matter if you're in jail, if you committed murders, you just deserve to be heard. One of the things that I've learned through my training in mental health is that the core level of who we all are that makes us good people is empathy. And if you're able to be in a position where you can be empathic and hear hear the experience and understand the emotion of another person, then you have gained a whole lot. I remember sitting in sessions with people who are very different from me, whose experiences were very different and who probably had done things that were very heinous or bad or whatever. But in that second, I had to find the deepest emotion in me that empathized with what that person was experiencing. And, there were times when I don't know what it's like to be abandoned, but I definitely understand what it's like to be misunderstood and left out. I understand what it feels like to be not heard. I understand, and if you can identify with the emotion, then you'll forget all of the stuff that someone is doing or has done that you consider to be bad or wrong, because you can identify with the emotion. And that works for me. And I teach my students that too. I'm like, empathy is the core of all leadership, because if you can identify where people are, they'll follow you and they'll respect you and they'll want to be in your presence because you have identified a feeling that attaches both of you together. I don't understand what it's like to be neglected as a child, but I understand what it's like to be, the last person on, called on the list, or I understand what it's like to be the only person who doesn't have a representative or a voice. Find that place. Find what that person is experiencing. If you don't understand that it's about race, understand that it's about being left out, that it's about not being heard. If you can find that place in your life, then you can identify with what they're experiencing in their life. And I think that helps folks to move past this exterior of, I don't see color and I don't see race. Yeah, you probably don't, but do you see the emotion of feeling left out and marginalized and not taken seriously? If you can identify that in your life, then you can identify that in their life. Listen to what they're saying, they're feeling. Does that make sense? That's how I explain to people who are trying to understand someone that they can't identify with. Well, you can understand their feelings and you can understand that deep emotion. So go with that. And once you go with that, then you sit back and you're like, oh, you're not that much different than I am. You feel hurt in the same way that I feel hurt. We might not have the same experiences, but your hurt is the same. Our laughter is the same. Our smiles are the same. Love feels the same. Hurt feels the same too.
Wow. And that was a great explanation. Empathy is the core of it all. Everybody just needs to really feel that and understand that, and then we can move on. I think that is a reason for the difference today. A lot of people are feeling a lot of empathy.
Yeah.
That was incredible. I felt like that was That was my therapy session right there. I appreciate you so much for that, and that was really all of my questions. But I would like to know if you have anything else you would want to maybe touch on or talk about regarding this topic, and even with the current events with the pandemic.
I, as I said earlier, I think we can keep going in this mode if we all take a role and all take a position, and just keep moving forward in that position, and not lose sight of what we're supposed to be doing. And I just encourage people to find what you're good at and do that. You know, if what you're good at is calling your friends and checking on them in the midst of this pandemic and all of these issues, check on them. You know, if you're known to be the person who keeps, you know, everybody in good spirits, by telling jokes, send jokes, you know, check on folks the best way that you know how. If you're known to be the person to write critical papers and articles, do that. You know, whatever your role is, infuse everything that's happening into that. And so I just want to encourage uh, everyone to just use what you have. And I think we all will make a difference if we're using that.
It's incredible. Thank you so much, Dr. Graham. It was a pleasure meeting you. I really hope one day we can actually meet in person. That would be great too. And just to wrap it all up, we just discussed topics about racism and these current protests that's going on. And we really just delved into the issues and how to really understand it and know what to do with yourself instead of, you know, going out and trying to find your place. Just, you know, just be present.
Yes.
And be empathetic.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. And I'll go ahead and end it. Like I said, it was very nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you. A pleasure meeting you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.